I never thought my marriage would reach a point like this. Just a short conversation, only a few sentences long, yet powerful enough to shatter everything I had tried to preserve through 3 years of living together. That night, the kitchen was lit only by a warm yellow strip of light above the island. The smell of dish soap lingered in the air. I was placing the last clean bowl onto the rack when I heard my wife, Emily, exhale sharply, as if gathering courage. She stood leaning against the refrigerator, arms crossed, her eyes so cold they seemed to drain the room of its warmth. "My family thinks you're not worthy of this family," she said, her tone flat, almost clinical, like she was reading out lab results. "And honestly, I think so too." I froze, letting the sound of dripping water fill the silence. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I looked at her, not with blame, not with anger. Just a quiet, tired kind of gaze, as if I'd always known that eventually, those words would come. Finally, I simply said, "I understand." No shouting, no slammed doors, no chairs knocked over. Just 2 adults standing in a kitchen, and a truth dropping between them like a stone. Maybe it was my silence that bothered Emily more than any argument ever could. "You're not going to say anything else?" she asked, her voice rising. "I already did," I replied. She bit her lip. She had probably expected me to beg, argue, plead, to do what desperate men often do when they feel their place in the family slipping. But I didn't. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because the moment she said those words, one thing became painfully clear to me: there was nothing left for me to explain. Emily turned and walked upstairs, leaving me alone with wet hands and a hollow ache in my chest. I wiped the sink, shut off the lights, and went to bed 2 hours later. When I opened the bedroom door, she was already turned toward the wall, intentionally leaving no room for me on the bed. I lay at the very edge, listening to her sharp, uneven breaths, unsure whether they came from anger or from crying. But I didn't touch her. Not that night, and not in the nights that followed. The next days felt like an unspoken ceasefire. Emily barely talked to me. When she did, it was only in clipped sentences like, "You left your stuff everywhere again," or, "I'm eating out tonight." Her coldness didn't surprise me. She had always been the type to be easily swayed by her family, especially her mother and aunts. To them, I was always the average man. Not rich, not prestigious, not someone who could give their daughter what they believed she deserved. I heard it all, yet never reacted. Partly out of respect for Emily. Partly because I was raised in a household that had nothing but kindness to offer. I wasn't used to fighting. My silence wasn't weakness. It was simply my belief that love could soften things. But maybe I was wrong. On Wednesday afternoon, her mother called. Emily put the phone on speaker, and since I was standing right beside her, I heard everything clearly. "You have to understand, a man like him, he's a burden. Marrying him only drags you down. The whole extended family can see that." Emily didn't argue. She just murmured a small, "Okay." I said nothing. I simply stepped away from the living room, walked out to the balcony, and stared down at the neighborhood kids playing freely. For the first time, I felt like I didn't belong in this house anymore. Like a puzzle piece forced into a space it didn't fit. On Friday, when I got home from work, Emily was trying on clothes in front of the mirror. New dress, new makeup, new perfume. Everything about her signaled she wanted to look perfect tonight. I stood at the doorway for a few seconds before asking, "You're going out tonight?" "Yeah," she replied, eyes fixed on her reflection. "We're having Sunday dinner with the family, and Mom said I need to look presentable. You're coming too." "All right. And try not to make things awkward," she added, her tone sharp with implication. I didn't answer. I just changed my clothes, ate dinner alone, and worked until late. But in my mind, her Monday words kept looping like a broken system prompt. "My family thinks you're not worthy." And honestly, I think so too. Humans are strange. One sentence may not kill you, but it can make you stop feeling alive. Sunday morning arrived with the weight of a slow, persistent headache. Emily drove while I sat in silence. For the entire 40-minute ride, she didn't say a single word. I stared out the window, feeling like a passenger in my own life. When we turned onto the long driveway leading to her family's estate, I saw expensive cars already lined up. Every Sunday they gathered here. Her parents, her sisters, her aunts and uncles, and most importantly, the head of the family, Emily's grandfather, known to everyone as Grandfather Whitmore. The house always smelled of old wood and carried a quiet sense of authority in its walls. I never liked the atmosphere, but I respected him, the only person who had ever treated me with fairness. As we walked in, all eyes turned toward us, many of them openly scrutinizing. Emily rushed to her mother, and as they leaned in to whisper, I still heard every word. See? Walking next to him makes you look like you're dragging someone beneath you. I swallowed something bitter, but kept a polite smile. The kind of smile that says, I heard you, but I won't make a scene. The aunts didn't even bother to lower their voices. One thing about him, he's kind. But too kind turns into useless. Another added, Emily deserves better. Everyone knows that. Emily didn't deny it. She stood still, letting others grind my dignity like entertainment. I sat at the long dining table, surrounded by cold stares. But my calm wasn't strength, it was exhaustion. I had burned out long before this day. All that remained was ash. The grandfather wasn't there yet. He always entered last, once everyone was seated. But today something felt different. Silent glances. Whispered exchanges. Attention tightening the air. Emily sat beside me but didn't look my way. She checked her phone, fixed her hair, and smiled confidently at her aunt, like she knew she was winning at life today. And then, the large wooden door at the end of the hallway opened. The grandfather walked in. At almost 80, he still carried himself with the straight-backed presence of a former military man. He scanned the room slowly, deliberately. When his eyes landed on me, he gave a small, subtle nod, enough for me to know he understood more than the rest of them combined. He took his seat at the head of the table, resting both hands on his wooden cane, and the entire room fell silent. Today, he said, his voice rough but commanding, I have an announcement. Emily tucked her hair behind her ear, her lips curving into a confident smile, completely convinced that whatever he was about to say would benefit her. As for me, I simply sat up straight, unaware that tonight would change my life in a way none of us, myself included, could have predicted. The room was so silent I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, each movement sharp and deliberate. Grandfather braced both hands on the top of his cane and swept his gaze across the entire table, as if inspecting every face one final time. I have an announcement, he repeated, this time in slow, steady Vietnamese, ensuring everyone understood. And I want the whole family to listen carefully. No one dared lift a utensil. My mother-in-law gently set her wine glass down, the aunts straightened their backs. Emily subconsciously adjusted her posture, lifting her chin a little. She'd been the favored grandchild her whole life. To her, inheriting the family's biggest share was almost guaranteed. For a long time, he continued, I've thought about, after I'm gone, who will inherit everything I've built. He paused, letting the words settle into each person. The uncles and aunts began exchanging uneasy glances. The air thickened. I sat still, hands resting on my thighs, trying to keep my face as neutral as possible. I didn't believe any of this had anything to do with me. In every conversation before this, I avoided the topic of my wife's family asset. I never wanted, never dared, to touch any of it. At first, he said, I thought about dividing it evenly among my children. A share for each of you. But then I took a closer look. His eyes slowly drifted across the table. Most of you only see the money. None of you remember why we were able to build this home in the first place. My mother-in-law frowned slightly. One aunt, unable to contain herself, blurted out, Dad, that's unfair. We've always respected what you built. Grandfather let out a short laugh, one without even a trace of amusement. Respect? You respect my money. Not me. Emily shifted, though she kept her smile. She probably thought this was just his usual long speech before announcing the obvious, gifting her the biggest share. But then he turned his head and looked directly at me. And him. He tapped his cane lightly against the floor. The son-in-law this whole family likes to look down on. My heart stopped for a split second. Several heads turned toward me, some irritated, some contemptuous. Dad, my mother-in-law interjected, voice tight, why are you bringing him up? He has nothing to. Grandfather raised a hand. Silence snapped back instantly. I've made my decision, he said, each word dropping like stone. The entire estate of this family will be transferred to my son-in-law. For a second I thought I misheard. A fork clattered onto a plate. Emily, who had been smiling, froze mid-expression, the smile cracking off her face. My mother-in-law shot up from her seat. What did you just say? She nearly screamed. Grandfather repeated, slower this time, enunciating each word. The entire estate will go to my son-in-law. The room exploded. Aunts and uncles spoke over one another, their voices crashing into the walls. That's impossible. Is this some kind of joke? He's an outsider. Who is he to inherit? Your own children haven't even gotten anything. Emily turned to me, eyes wide in disbelief, as if I had secretly schemed this behind her back. She stammered, Grandpa, what are you talking about? He has nothing to do with our businesses. He's not even qualified. Grandfather didn't look at her. He simply narrowed his eyes and asked calmly, Do you have any objections, Emily? That question was a knife sliding perfectly into her weakest spot. I could see her hand clench, loosen, clench again. Only moments earlier, she was certain she was the one above me. Now, with a single sentence, the hierarchy flipped. She swallowed. I think you're rushing this. He doesn't know anything about running a business. And you know it, Grandpa. And also, my family has. She shot a quick look at her mother, begging for backup. Her mother immediately stepped forward, voice sharp as glass. Dad, you cannot hand everything to a son-in-law. He is not a Whitmore. He didn't grow up in this house. But he is the only one in this family, Grandfather cut her off, who values human beings more than money. The table fell dead silent. He turned and looked me directly in the eye. Do you remember the day we met at the supermarket? I stiffened. That was before Emily and I got engaged. I had seen an elderly man in an old coat struggling with a heavy bag of rice. He slipped on a wet step, the bag burst. People looked, but no one stopped. I rushed in, helped him up, picked up the rice, refused his offer to pay me back. I even called a taxi for him, and told the driver to go slow because he looked like he was hurt. That night, I laughed while telling my mom on the phone, nowadays when you do something good, people think you have an ulterior motive. Then I forgot about it. I had no idea he remembered every detail. From that day, he said, I asked someone to look into you. I wanted to know why a decent man like you allowed himself to be disrespected by this entire family. Several people gasped. So he had known everything. I saw, he continued, that you never asked this family for a single cent. You work, you support yourself, and you help your own parent. You even help the staff in this house quietly, paying for their medicine when they're too afraid to ask their employers. He glanced toward the end of the table, where the elderly housekeeper bowed her head, shoulders trembling. Meanwhile, he said, turning toward his children, every time you speak, it's about money. Every visit, you ask me, Dad, when are you transferring the assets? Not one of you asks about my health or whether I sleep well. His voice hardened. You're all waiting for me to die so you can divide my body before it's even cold. And right in front of this son-in-law, you called him a burden, thinking I wouldn't hear. You forget this house has thinner walls than you think. Everyone lowered their gaze. Even my father-in-law, usually silent, didn't dare look up. Emily had gone pale. She knew exactly what she had said about me, the words that cut like blades. But she clearly never imagined her grandfather heard them too. "Grandpa, I didn't mean," she started, but he turned, his eyes suddenly icy. "Whether you meant it or not is your choice," he said. "But you don't get to decide someone's worth simply because they're not as wealthy as you." The air grew so dense it hurt to breathe. My shoulders tightened. No one had ever defended me like this before. Everything I had been swallowing in silence, an 80-year-old man was saying for me, with the sharpness of a lifetime lived. He returned to the main point. "I've decided. All shares, all properties, all businesses in my name, will be bequeathed to him." He nodded in my direction. "But," he emphasized, "how it will be used or divided is entirely up to him. I'm giving him the key. Whoever he chooses to open the door for, that's his decision. None of you have any automatic entitlement anymore." One aunt slammed her hand on the table. "This is unfair. He's not blood." "Blood without character," grandfather replied, "is nothing more than a liability on a birth certificate." Emily gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. I could see the veins on her hand. She stared at me as if to ask, "What did you do? What did you tell him?" But I had no answer, because truly I had done nothing. I had only lived my life trying not to lose my self-respect. "You," grandfather turned to me, his voice softening, "what do you think?" The room froze again. This time, every gaze landed on me, not with simple disdain, but with a mix of anger, envy, and fear. I drew a deep breath. Honestly, I still hadn't processed everything. In just minutes, my position in this family had spun 180 degrees. From the unworthy outsider to the person who suddenly held the fate of their financial future. I could almost hear their thoughts. How do we get him on our side? How do we take back what should be ours? Emily cleared her throat softly, as if reminding me she was sitting beside me. My mother-in-law stared at me with a warning in her eyes. My father-in-law looked down, lost. I set my chopsticks down and dabbed the corner of my mouth with a napkin. My heart was pounding, but when I finally spoke, my voice came out strangely calm. I began, glancing around the table and finally resting my gaze on grandfather's deeply lined face. "I need to say a few things first, before I can answer." Emily whipped her head toward me. "You," she hissed, full of alarm, as if terrified I'd say something that could shatter her standing even further. But I kept my eyes fixed on grandfather, who waited with the patience of someone who already knew the room would not breathe until I spoke. "Before I accept or decline anything," I said, "I think the family needs to hear me. Just once." Grandfather nodded. "All right. Speak." The entire room held its breath, and at that moment, for the first time since entering this family, I decided I would not stay silent anymore. I rose from my seat. The air in the room was so thick it felt like it clung to my skin. Everyone was looking at me, but for the first time I didn't feel crushed by their stares. From the day I stepped into this family, I began slowly. I've tried to respect everyone. I stayed silent when I was looked down on. I endured it when I was insulted. I thought that as long as I lived decently, people would eventually understand. Emily swallowed hard. Her fingers were digging into her napkin. But the more I stayed silent, I went on, the more it made everyone believe I was weak, that I had no worth, that I was a burden. One of the aunts immediately snapped back. "Because you're always silent like a statue." "Have you ever proven?" "I don't prove anything," I cut in. "Because I don't believe respect should be bought with a performance." Grandfather smiled faintly and gave a small nod. My mother-in-law clenched her jaw. "So you're saying this family doesn't respect you?" I looked straight at her. "With all due respect, you've never respected me. Not once." Her mouth opened to argue, but I continued. "You've called me a freeloader. You've called me a stain on the family line." I heard it all. I just didn't respond. Emily froze, eyes wide. Maybe she hadn't realized just how harsh her mother had been. "And you," I turned to my wife, my voice softer but no longer weak. You told me I wasn't worthy. You said it like it was an obvious fact. You let your family humiliate me right in front of you. Emily blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. I didn't mean to, I repeated. But you said it. Very clearly. And you haven't apologized. Not once. The table fell completely silent. I heard one of the uncles exhale sharply, as if he couldn't believe I was finally speaking up. I don't blame anyone, I continued. Everyone has the right to live according to what they believe. But I also have the right to decide where I stand. I turned back to Grandfather, the only one whose gaze hadn't wavered. Grandfather, I said, I'm grateful for your trust, but I can't accept the entire family estate. The table erupted in whispers. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. My mother-in-law practically screamed, Are you out of your mind? I kept my voice calm. I didn't come into this family to become an heir. I just wanted to be treated as a human being. Grandfather straightened slightly, leaning on his cane as he looked at me. Are you certain? Yes, I nodded. If I accept, everyone will say I had an agenda from the beginning. I don't want to be the excuse they use to hate each other even more. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes neither sad nor pleased, just the gaze of an old man seeing straight through the person in front of him. Then he laughed, a loud, full laugh that filled the room, as if he had finally witnessed what he'd been waiting for all along. Good, he said. Very good. Everyone stared in shock. Your refusal is exactly why I wanted to give it to you. I hadn't even processed that when he struck his cane against the floor with a sharp crack. But you cannot refuse everything, he declared. You're the only one fit to safeguard what I've built. His voice hardened, taking on the tone of an order. I will redistribute the assets. The whole family held its breath. Houses, land, shares. They'll be divided equally according to the law among my children and grandchildren. Several aunts and uncles let out a quiet sigh of relief, but before they could feel reassured, he went on. But the power to manage, oversee, and sign off on everything goes to him. He pointed directly at me. The room blew up again. This isn't fair. You're putting the knife in a stranger's hands. How can he possibly? Why not? Grandfather almost barked. You all want the money without the responsibility. He's the opposite. He turned back to me. If you agree, from now on, every major decision regarding this family's assets will require your signature. Not so you can profit, but so you can stop them from burning this legacy to the ground. I felt the weight of it sink onto my shoulders. This wasn't power, it was a burden. What do you think? He asked. I drew in a long breath. If that's truly what you want, I'll do it. But I don't want anyone to think I fought for this. He chuckled. That's exactly what I like about you. Emily was trembling, her eyes red. You're not really going to do this, right? You wouldn't embarrass me like that, would you? I looked at her for a long moment. You've been embarrassing me for a long time, Emily. She choked on a sob. And for the first time I didn't feel pity, only emptiness. My mother-in-law lunged forward. So this is how you get revenge on this family? I stood straight, my voice steady and level. No. I just don't want to stay in a place where, every single day, I have to remind myself to stay silent just to keep the peace. Then I turned back to Grandfather. I'll act as the guardian of the assets, exactly as you wish. But after everything is settled, I'd like to leave this family. As for my marriage to Emily, I don't think it can be saved anymore. Emily broke down in tears. Please don't. I'm sorry. I'll change. I didn't mean it. I was just influenced by everyone. I looked at her. The problem isn't that you repeated what others said, I replied, my voice sad but not shattered. The problem is, you believed it. She collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. My mother-in-law shouted, If you divorce my daughter, how will we face? You can worry about saving face, I said. I'll worry about saving my dignity." Grandfather burst out laughing so hard he had to cough a few times. "Good. Finally, someone in this house dares to speak the truth." I bowed my head slightly toward him. "Thank you for everything. But I need to live my own life." He grasped my hand and squeezed it gently. "Go. I'll handle the rest." I turned and walked toward the door. No one called after me. The only sounds behind me were Emily's sobs echoing through the wide room, and the angry pounding of my mother-in-law's fist on the table. As I reached the doorway, Grandfather spoke one last sentence, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The day you keep looking down on those who understand respect is the day you lose everything." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The Sunday night breeze brushed against my face, carrying with it a strange lightness. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. And that was when I finally understood. Respect is never something you beg for. It's something you reclaim, by walking away from the places that refuse to give it to you.